Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the second day of the European SDG Summit. The topic of today is one of the most important elements in the transformation we all need. It will be about finance. And I will talk about the agenda later, but we have the opportunity to listen to Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, the Commissioner of Economy in the European Commission. He needs to go to another meeting and apologizes he cannot stay longer with us. But we appreciate he could make the time. We will make a connection over Teams with him so we can listen to one of the architects of our future economic system. Commissioner Gentiloni, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you and good morning. I'm glad to participate to this industry SDG summit. We know that we are facing a real emergency with the second phase of this pandemic that is going on across all Europe. And we have to manage the response, but at the same time, we have to work on the quality of the recovery. And this, I think, is the real challenge ahead of us, because the speed, the quantitative speed of the recovery is very clearly slowed down. We had a very strong third quarter, but we know that this recovery has been already losing momentum since September, and the new measures that are taken in member states in these days and weeks will slower even more the recovery. So the challenge remains there, and this is my first point, because yes, indeed, the second phase of the pandemic is among us. It will not disappear tomorrow, but the fundamental choice we have to do is that in facing this emergency, we are confirming also our strategic goals or not. And the decision that the Commission has taken, as you know, is definitely yes to face the emergency, but at the same time to invest on the future. Honestly, we could have decided in a different way. We could have put the Green Deal on hold, but we decided to confirm the ambition to be leading as European Union in this global challenge. And I think it's interesting that we are seeing from different part of the world announcements that are echoing what the European Union has decided. Interesting, for example, as you know, that the new Japanese Prime Minister yesterday announced the goal of reaching climate neutrality for 2050. Of course, we count on you. We know that the role of European business in supporting the Green Deal and the United Nations Sustainable and Development Goals is essential. And it is essential, I think, to try to see this challenge as an opportunity to lead, because there is always an advantage for the first mover, and an opportunity to create new jobs and new quality for our society. The Commission, as you know, decided on the Green Deal before the pandemic. It was a sort of identity card of the new von der Leyen Commission, the proposal of the Green Deal right at the beginning of this year. And we worked to integrate these goals, the sustainable and development goals, also in our economic surveillance process, which we call the European semester. This was something that we began this year, also using the Eurostat report on the evolution of sustainable and development goals in EU, a report that is demonstrating that we had progress in several of the 17 goals, but we are also lagging behind, especially in 2 of these goals, and these are climate action and gender equality. And this is a reason to even strengthen what I was saying, that we should use the recovery strategy to have our economies more sustainable and also more equal from a gender point of view. Of course, the pandemic will have a global impact with the risk of reversing years of progress at a global level on hunger, education, poverty, healthcare. We saw the figures released recently by the World Bank about the fact that we could have 100 million new person in poverty. This due to the pandemic, and this could make for the first time since 1998 figures in world poverty again on the rise, not decreasing as it has been. And also at a global level, we are very much worried on education. We have dozens of millions of children in poorer countries losing their opportunities for education. And this means in many cases also, if you lose the opportunity for education, you also lose one meal in your day life. And this is, of course, contribution to, again, to hunger and poverty. This dimension needs to be addressed. We worked in the multilateral and global institutions to try to strengthen the support for poorer countries. And this, I think, is the multilateral commitment is something that EU should keep in our horizon for the future, because it is quite dangerous that in facing the hardest economic crisis that we have seen after the Second World War, we see a insufficient level of multilateral cooperation, and we have to strengthen this. We will have a good opportunity to do this if we will lead by example. This is why the quality of next generation EU, the quality of the recovery plans in EU is so important. As you know, these plans will be written not in Brussels, they will be written in each member state, but we will, as a Commission, guarantee coherence of these plans with our global priorities, the digital competitiveness of Europe, and especially sustainability. On sustainability, I will only mention you three numbers that shows our commitment. The first number is 55. You know that we increased the target of reduction of emissions in 2030 from 40 to 55%. If we want to keep our commitment for a neutral continent in 2050, this new target is of essence. And at the same time, we established a target of 37% of investment in these national recovery and resilience plans, with investment committed to environmental sustainability, and also from the issuance point of view, we committed to have 30% of the European bonds that will be in the financial markets in the next years to finance our recovery. 30% will be on green bonds. Of course, this global leadership is not only bringing us advantages, but also dangers and challenges. And this is why we have to avoid that the European leadership in the green transition is misused by other economies, other competitors against our industries and our economy. And this is why we are working on this carbon border adjustment mechanism and on the relation between this mechanism and our emission trade system. And we will come with a proposal on this in the first semester of next year to avoid any carbon leakage and any weakening of our industries because of the green transition. So in conclusion, I think that in the coming months, we have to show to be able to face emergency and transform our economies together. I think that European institutions took great decisions in the last 7 months, and we count on your contributions to continue in this path to make Europe stronger together in these challenging times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, for being with us and for making time in your very busy agenda. The audience now that you have to move to the next meeting. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Gentiloni, and your message about using the recovery to make the economy sustainable, more sustainable and equal, also from a gender perspective. We also believe that the integration of the SDGs in the semester, the European semester, is a very important step forward and will lead towards more aligned action. We had already questions about difference between European countries, and I think the plan of the Commission of that integration in the European semester is very important for that. So thank you for your contribution. I will go now to the remainder of the agenda. On the main part of the agenda for today, as you will see, we have a large lineup of speakers, and so first we will have some introductory remarks, keynote speech, and then a panel debate, and then we will take it from there. But As mentioned earlier, finance is the core of our debate today. And to introduce the topic, I would like to give the floor now to Hans Aams. Hans is not only the Group Public Affairs Officer of Hitachi Europe, but also since more than 4 years, Hans is the chair of the board of CSR Europe, of our organization. And it's exactly under Hans's leadership that CSR Europe developed its strategy 2030 and included finance, but also tax transparency as one of the key priority areas of our work. And it's a pleasure that I can give the floor now to Hans to present.
So Stefan, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Listening to the Commissioner, the question which I have is, how can we make this Green Deal and sustainability in general a driver for growth in Europe? Now, the answer lies for me in the right combination between business transformation, finance, collaboration, and engagement in the policy dialogue. CSR Europe, with its companies and national partners, is a network of more than 10,000 companies, small and big ones, and we want to be the catalyst for making Europe more sustainable. Therefore, we have launched the European Pact for Sustainable Industry with 3 ambitious targets. 1. By 2024, all industry federations will have developed a mature sustainability roadmap. 2. By 2030, 10,000 companies will be engaged in sectorial and cross-sectorial collaboration, contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And 3. By end 2024, help EU institutions to integrate the Sdgs in all EU policies with clear accompanying measures and incentives for sectors and cross-sectorial impact-oriented collaboration. But, ladies and gentlemen, the Pact can only be successful if we work together. So I invite today all industry associations, companies and policy members to engage with us and to shape the progress required together. Business transformation, collaboration and engagement in the policy dialogue is at the heart of what CSR Europe is all about. We're providing the opportunity to develop more mature and integrated management systems to guide the change of business. We also initiate and incubate collaborative platforms in sectors or in value chains. And we engage in the policy dialogue to enhance the level playing field and to make the sustainable and inclusive society possible. But to make a sustainable Europe a reality for everyone, sustainable finance is necessary. Sustainable investing will drive returns in the future, and sustainable business models will drive a sustainable economy. Alignment and collaborative action are required in this respect. So where to start? On top of my list is the reorientation of capital towards the most sustainable solutions. This can lead to a redefinition of the boundaries of the new economic system. To conclude, on my final slide, a few comments about my own company, Hitachi. As part of our mission to help solve society's challenges, we supply social innovation business in many countries across Europe. And last year, we collected, with the much appreciated help from the team at CSR Europe, feedback and input from stakeholders on our approach to impact visualization and how impact measurement within a business can contribute to business decision making. Well, the most important way forward for me personally is about ownership and to find attractive ways to articulate the green and sustainable agenda in incentives for employees and our business sections and leaders. And to achieve this, we are in particular considering how we can increase customer and partner cooperation, which in my opinion is essential for creating impact and ultimately achieving a sustainable business. And by doing so, we can help to make a sustainable Europe a reality for everyone. Thanks for listening and wishing you a very interesting event.
Thank you very much, Hans, for making the link also between the needed systemic transformation that also the Commissioner was speaking earlier of the financial system, but also the way an individual company can integrate this direction in a practical and in a managerial way. And we will later elaborate further on that, on how an individual company and also the financial sector can make this part of their management process. But as mentioned earlier, the European Union in general is playing a leading and a role in reshaping of the world of sustainable finance. And it's therefore an honor and a pleasure for us to have Sirpa Pietikäinen with us. As an MEP, she's the co-rapporteur on the taxonomy dossier and also equally engaged on the tax files. Mrs. Pietikäinen will give us an update on the taxonomy, and we can explore how it can guide industry sectors also towards future investment. And we always appreciate to have you with us because we believe you are really a strong force in guiding us further. So without further ado, I give the floor to you, and I think your slides will be put also on screen when you need them. Ms. Pietikäinen, you have 10 minutes only, I'm sorry, but please take your time.
Thank you. And I'm always very delighted to work with you. Because I think that this kind of a cooperation is the only thing that can save the world. Let me summarize a couple of things before starting with the sustainable finance part. And the first part, indeed, there is to start with the scale of the challenge, and you might use the slides or not. I can explain it without the slides also, but just sort of send them just in case you might have a need for them for the future. And that is that if we now make wrong investments, that means that they are underestimated or they are sidetracked. Like the palm oil is a good example, bad example about that, trying to solve the climate change. So what actually happens then is that you waste the very valuable time and the financial resources. So the first point is the actions need to be up with the challenge. That means that you need science-based approach. That means that you need a backcasting approach. That means that while we know that all the sustainability challenges and resource consumption are exponentially growing, and actually the curve is very steep. So we need to take that into account and not only linearly, gradually try to take the actions to minimize with 5% or 3% or 7%, for example, the CO2 emissions. And actually, as much as I do respect the Commission's proposal, if we would listen the science and the alarming notices that are emerging in the new IPCC report, the 2030 climate neutrality should be the target, but it is very difficult to get through in politics. So meet the challenge with your actions. Use the science and use the backcasting approach, not to underestimate the challenge or make double or triple investment. Secondly, harmonize how you measure the public and private funding. And this is the big fight what we have had with the new element of multi-annual financial framework, InvestEU, European semester, and of course the Recovery and Resilience Fund. They should be measured with the taxonomy as well as other private investments. So to see two important things. Firstly, what is the do no significant harm? We shouldn't use any euros to invest or support fossil-based economies, be it that coal mines or be it that new opening sources of oil or gas in different parts of the world. And palm oil is very important example that you shouldn't not only look the climate, but you would need to look the biodiversity, you would need to look the circular economy, you would need to look the resource consumption, you need to look the toxicity, and you would need to look the water reservoirs and other parts that are important. Well, anyway, this is on basis on the taxonomy. This is how we base on the disclosure regulation, And on the future, the non-financial reporting directive, what the industries should report about, and then the investors should pay attention to avoid this kind of a triple risks. Of course, financial risk is one, and then the direct impact of the climate change would be the another one. The triple layer there actually is that if we have full-blown climate change, none of our economies could or societies that matter could survive that impact. So that then should be the taxonomy next steps that are actually planned on the platform. And then the big step, what I heard that the commissioner was talking about, is that we should harmonize the indicators and we should harmonize the life cycle assessment methodology. It's a bit like the IFRS in financial accounting. And on these bases, you would need to measure where you are putting your money on semester, on EU budgets, on EU funds, and on national funds, and on the special vehicles that we are having. And it needs to be, as said, aligned with the private sector taxonomy, so what the investors and the companies are looked upon to be doing, because otherwise we make effective measures and we make extra bureaucracy for the companies to report with different kind of reporting schemes. And this means, and this is the whole topic what we are discussing today, we need to integrate so that it would be meaningful with the SDGs. And this should be the frame and the content on SDG reporting, both in the public and on the private sector. Science-based, taking into account the growing challenges. And then what is the very important part of the SDGs is that we get actually the S and G, so ESG. And as we know in the taxonomy, the social taxonomy is coming later on. That takes a bit of a time, but we need to look the social impacts, because you can't create, as you all know, the sustainability without the social sustainability. And then the taxation, fair taxation, fighting corruption, and being supportive to diversity in the governance are very important factors in the companies as well, and of course in the public sector that matter. So it should be forced the same principles there. And this sort of integrating ESG to taxonomy on private and public, and then this whole framework on SDG reporting, and hopefully to putting that in international fora would be the big thing that we all should be working for. And I'm very happy to see the initiatives of the green bonds, the business, different kind of business initiatives, what I can see there for the 2030 climate neutrality and transition plans. But actually, that should be part of the Green Deal. What we would need is the transition plan of the EU, the world, and companies that matter. How you are going to be sustainable by 2030, because we just do not have that much more time. And how do you integrate the data in European statistics and UN statistical framework so that the SMEs could look it like you can look the calorie values and nutritional values in food packing? They could look on what they purchase and what they use on their calculations, so that this was not only to be left on bigger companies. Well, there are a lot of issues I would like to be engaged on discussing with you in the future, and I'm very happy to answer your questions or get your feedback in the future also. But while I'm looking a bit the time, I think that I have been using, am I right, the time what I had been reserved already by now. Thank you.
That was perfect, your timing. Thank you very much for this thoughts, and we understand that the strong focus you put on aligning the public and private and how the taxonomy can play the role there, if it would indeed also include a strong element on the social, and also your what you are saying about integration and indeed based on science. I think their messages are important for us. Thank you, and I hope you will further engage in the debate. I would like to say to all the audience as well, you can use the chat function also to ask questions, to make your opinion clear, so we can have some more interaction. In the meantime, I'm happy to announce our next speaker, which is Hakan Lucius, from the Head of Corporate Responsibility and Stakeholder Engagement in the European Investment Bank. Of course, the European Investment Bank's role in the recovery and the transition cannot be overestimated. Mr. Lucius, we would like to understand from you what the current direction is of the bank on sustainable investment. And given that the bank is one of the largest multilateral providers of green finance, its direction, but also its learnings and examples will shape very much our future. So it's with pleasure I give the floor to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you for this opportunity, and also congratulations on the summit. It fills me with pride to see that we in the European Union are actually leading in terms of going towards a climate neutral economy, and we are leading in taxonomies, in non-financial directives, which we're working on. But you have asked me to talk about the new role of investors when it comes to a climate neutral economy. And investors have to be mindful of the impacts of their investments. They have to know what their money does. Traditionally, investors have relied on financials. They have relied on financial statements, balance sheets, income statements, cash flows, ratings. It was all cash-based. But if you're purely cash-based, as an investor, you might be missing out on something very important, because all those metrics on the financial side do not capture your impact on society as a whole. They do not capture your impact on biodiversity and ecosystems. They do not capture your effects on climate change. So how do you actually take that into account? How do you do that? And that's why it's so important that we have harmonized rules and tools with the taxonomy, with the upcoming non-financial disclosure directive, to be able to allow investors to look into that. But they don't have to wait. You can do it already now. And the European Investment Bank is maybe not a bad example, because we do actually have standards. We have standards on climate change. We have standards on biodiversity. We have standards on occupational health and safety, on cultural heritage, and. 10 standards on environmental and social matters to guide the investments and ensure that those investments benefit the society as a whole. Because there are risks, but there are also opportunities. The risks on the climate side to stay is clearly on the transition risk, obviously, but also on the physical one. Transition risks are for those who emit a lot today and will not be able to do so tomorrow. But physical risks are for everyone. Risk is one thing, but there's also the opportunity side one has to look in very carefully. And one has to shape the agenda going forward. And as such, I'm very proud that as the European Investment Bank, we have made 4 decisions which will help this climate neutrality very clearly. As the largest multilateral bank and the Bank of the European Union doing real economic investments, we have said 4 things. First, we have said we stop all fossil fuel financing. I think that was fundamental. Second, all activities will be Paris aligned by the end of this year. So stopping fossil fuels, but also Paris aligning all investment activities. Thirdly, at least half of all the investments we do must go towards climate change and environmental sustainability. And the other half has to be in harmony with it, because we have got many investments for climate change and environmental sustainability, but we have many others which may not have a climate dimension too much, but are absolutely vital for our well-being. And last not least, the 4th point is about going into this decade, this critical decade ahead of us, and unlocking 1 trillion of investments in this decade from 2020 to 2030. So in that sense, I'm very happy to actually be at the European Investment Bank, where we try to lead the way for investors, show how you can capture those dimensions and go towards a climate neutral economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucius, for indeed this very clear overview of what the role is of the European Investment Bank, what your sentence about being mindful on the impact of investment and the tools and the standards that the bank is using, and then the 4 principles you outlined at the end. I think it's very inspirational. And I would like to turn now to the companies, so on the private sector side, to see how is the private sector integrating these elements. Because as a general type of conclusion or a kind of tendency we see from previous speakers, the landscape of the financial world is changing drastically and even more. And I think the commissioner's vision about that sustainability and the Green Deal should stay, or should be even the driver of the recovery, is a testimony of that. But the landscape is changing. And I remember myself, maybe not longer than 10, 15 years ago, when we talked about ESG finance, that was this niche investment opportunity somewhere with some indexes, etc. But no one really looked at it. It was a very small business. But since then, the expectations have increased, but also more viable opportunities came up, and several speakers outlined already that. At the same time, we see also policymakers and investors started further shaping the ecosystem for sustainable finance, and also a number of leading companies integrated sustainability in its own decision making, and that's where we want to look at. But we see that also in kind of more collaborative approaches. There is a UNPRI. I think it was not longer than a month ago when the UN Global Compact issued with their CFO task force a set of standards. Also later today, we will hear from the European Banking Federation and their principle on responsible banking. So getting out of the niche or out of the leadership only is a very important way of dealing with this changing landscape. And it's therefore also that on our next step is we have a very notorious panel and a very high-level panel that is talking to us from a business perspective. And I would like to give, and I'm sorry we cannot give each of you not more than 10 minutes, but first of all, Saori de Boer, member of the Board of Executive Directors of BASF. Then also we will give the floor to Hasina P., the Head of Impact Finance Solutions of the Société Générale. And last but not least, Anthony Balabriga from BBVA. So these 3 speakers will speak to us from the work they are doing, and also from the way they engage with other companies, be it in the value chain, be it in their own sector, on this topic of sustainable finance. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. de Boer. And thank you for being with us, making the time for being with us. And we would like to hear from you, how does BASF provide this clear and standardized ESG information to investors, and also the value to society approach, because that is, I think, a very good practice example on how to integrate what the previous speaker said in the management decision-making of a company. Mrs. de Boer, the floor is yours, and thank you again for being with us. I see we will connect to you over the speakers chat or over the phone, and we will give the floor first to Anthony Balabriga from BBVA, if you don't mind, and then we will try to solve the issue together with your team. Anthony, can you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Stefan?
yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this kind of invitation, and congratulations for the conference. Great pleasure to be here, especially in this session focused on sustainable finance as a business transformation. No? I would like to structure my speech in four topics. First, a little bit of context that already connect with the previous panelists and key speakers. Then I would like to highlight the work that the banking industry is doing aligning our activities with the society's goals, with initiatives like the Principles for Responsible Banking. And then finally, I would like to share our special journey that we are living at BBVA, and also which are the main challenges, main implications that we have. So, well, in terms of the context, it has been already covered, no? But we have these two mega challenges of our generations, no? And next decade, we are going to see a massive shift of value between activities and sectors. We are going to have winners and losers. This massive shift has to be aligned with the society's goals and climate goals, and we play as a financial sector a key role, no, to make the consistent flows in this transition, no, and at the end of the day, it will mean a massive disruption on businesses, probably the biggest disruption in business for humanity. So this is a huge opportunity for banks in this case, no. And then secondly, obviously, you have the mega challenge of the building back better in these shocks, where we have seen the interdependency between the society and the nature. And so we need to urgently this green, fair, and resilient recovery. And also is a great opportunity also for banks and for everything to reset. No, so we celebrate the efforts and the commitment that is shown by the European institutions, obviously the European Green Deal, and now the Next Generation EU. All see the efforts and the plan and the ambition of the European Investment Banking. We congratulate that this is the right approach that we need as a bank. And also, I also appreciate very much the comment from Sirpa, from the MEP, saying that we have to hear more science, no? And that's absolutely critical. So banks, we can play a key role in this transition, in this transformation. Today we are financing the 70% of the European economy. So we have a huge responsibility to provoke the change that we need, no? But what banks are doing, I think in general we have agreed just 1 year ago a new framework to define what does it mean to be a responsible bank, sustainable bank, no? With the Principles for Responsible Bank initiative, that initiative that was promoted by UNEP-FI, the partnership between the United Nations and the finance sector, with more than 300 financial institutions involved. And in this case, the Principles for Responsible Banking is the framework that help banks to connect the activities and to help them to align the activities with the society's goals. So it's an initiative that today is endorsed by close to 200 banks worldwide, with $43 trillion of assets, and representing practically 40% of the banking sector worldwide. No? These principles were signed 1 year ago, in September last year in New York. After 1 year, it is clear that we have done relevant steps. I would say the most distinctive features of these principles are, first, the relevance of impact assessment. Second, the importance of target setting. So all banks that endorse the principles have to set long-term targets in the areas of greatest impact. And the third one is around accountability. And also, I will highlight that is the first initiative together with the PRI and the Principles for Sustainable Insurance. This is the unique initiative that includes a civil society advisory body that will help to challenge on the implementation of these principles, and now is going to be applied by different institutions. So I think that is a good example of the collective effort the banks are doing. There is especially an initiative that is led within the Principles for Responsible Banking, which is the collective commitment to climate action, where 38 of these 200 banks, we are working all together to set long-term targets to align our activities with the Paris Agreement. So I think it's a good example, it's a good framework, a good umbrella to make a journey that is, well, it's a journey that we have to follow all different types of banks, not only the major banks, the bigger banks, but also other banks that are in emerging countries as well. No? And where we are now, BBVA. Well, BBVA is a global bank with 79 million customers worldwide, with presence in 30 countries and with 125,000 employees. Well, we start this journey, well, a lot of years ago, but 2.5 years ago, we amplified our ambition with our Pledge 2025. This was a plan with 3 key pillars: finance, manage, and engage. Finance, we set a target to mobilize 100 billion euros between 2018 and 2025. Now we have already mobilized 40 billion, not only in green finance, but also in financial inclusion and social infrastructures. Second pillar is manage. Our commitment in that moment was to enhance our impact assessment and ensure that our social environmental impact, direct and indirect, embedded in our decision-making processes. And we set the specific thresholds for specific activities. And we already start to say that we want to align our activity with the Paris Agreement. And the third pillar of the pledge is engage, because we think that we alone, we cannot do a lot. We have to engage with all our stakeholders. And that's, well, I would say that the principles for responsible banking was a clear example. No? But after 2 years and a half, we have done a lot of progress. But the most relevant point is that last December, we approved our new strategic plan, the 6 new strategic priorities that we are going to promote for the next 5 years as a business. And one of these priorities is sustainability, to help our clients and society to make this transition. So we have embedded sustainability not only as a good plan, but embed this in our strategy with clear 2 aspirations to help the clients in this transition, not only on climate action, but also on inclusive growth. And second aspiration, to define clear roadmap to align our activity with the Paris Agreement. And that's the reason why we have signed this commitment I mentioned before with UNFI, and also signed together with 4 banks, also with Société Générale, the Katowice commitment, where we have defined, let's say, the methodologies and the way to align the portfolios with the Paris Agreement. But we have a lot of challenges in this journey. I would say, very briefly, 6 challenges and implications. No? The first one is that we need the transition of the whole economy. It's not only providing funds to the green activities. We have to ensure that we help our clients, not only financing, but also in advisory services, to mobilize the whole economy with the right transition. This is the only way to succeed. The second challenge is about KPIs. We need metrics, specific KPIs that as a bank, we need to embed these KPIs in our strategic planning. In our case, we have decided to use mainly 2 KPIs. One is a sustainable finance mobilization. And the second one is around portfolio alignment. So considering the impact we are creating in climate, this approach of the double materiality that is promoted by the Commission. The third challenge is about capabilities, because sustainable finance is a new set of information for bankers. So we need to build capabilities within the bank. We have to get experts from different activities, and also we have to train teams. In our case, we have just launched 1 month ago a mandatory course for our 125,000 employees, providing sustainability training for all of them. Today, 1 month later, we already have 15,000 employees with this course already done. So this is absolutely critical. The fourth challenge is data. And here's the data in terms of data that we may use to help our clients. In our case, we have a very good example using in our platform with our clients, corporate clients. We have a specific feature that helps them in order to know the footprint, the carbon footprint they have, thanks to the data we have from our clients, compare this footprint with other competitors and other companies, and provide some advice how to reduce this footprint. This is a good example of the role we can do as banks, not only financing, as I said, also advisory. The disclosure challenge, which is really connect with all the action plan and the disclosure that we need from corporates and clients. We will need more information to manage better risk, and we celebrate the non-financial reporting directive, and all the work is doing now by IFRAC with the ESG standards as well. But this is absolutely critical. So it's not only investors we are going to ask that are going to ask information to companies, banks, we are going to ask a lot of more information to companies. So this trend will come. And the last one is risk management. Also, we celebrate that we start to see more coordination and alignment of the different pieces that have to be in place in banking supervision. But also we have to work a lot internally, as a bank. We have seen the expectations from the ECB released a few months ago, but we have to embed this in our way of managing risk. A colleague always said, that that if you change the risk management of a bank, you change the bank. So we are now in this journey. No? So to conclude, I would say that sustainability, at least in our case, also for other banks as well, but in our case, we have moved sustainability from a great plan to a core component of our strategy to become sustainability our business as usual. And I leave this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. It's really inspirational to hear what this journey that you are doing, not only with EBF, and I think it's not always right in the park to get all this, to create all that kind of alignment, but you managed to work that through. But then also to hear about the very practical way then BVVA starts working, well, started working even before on implementing these principles. And to stay in the same sphere, I would like to give the floor now first to Hasina. Hasina, Société Générale has made a commitment to create positive impact. Could you explain how that works in the bank, and especially in the work with clients? Because also we heard Anthony saying that that the advisory work is very important. So if you could explain maybe also in how you work with clients to get those principles.
Okay, can you hear me well, Stefan? So yeah, well, I have to say first that I was very pleased to hear Anthony, because I think that we share a lot, and it's very important that financial institutions work together in alliances to make things move forward. Because what we need is common framework, common methodology, the same way of working, so that we can make a bigger push all together. So I was very pleased to hear my colleague over there, because again, I think we do share a lot. What we see now is, I think, a new paradigm, and our clients, the corporates, are very much under pressure, positive pressure, I would like to say, because stakeholders' expectations have moved a lot, even over the past 12 months, I would say. So there is a lot of expectations from investors that can change their strategy in one day or another and exclude some of our corporates. Millennials, they can choose as consumers to be with a company or without, and they can choose to be their future employees or not. Same with employees, of course. So everybody now has a say on the strategies of the companies. It's no more about Milton Friedman's shareholders' value, precisely. It's more about what kind of value are you creating for your stakeholders. Some companies are okay with that. They're very well prepared. And some others are a bit not lost, but somewhat afraid of what's going on. And that's where we think we can help them. We can help them on things that are linked to the financial markets, of course, market access. How are you going to get equity? How are you going to get debt? You need to change the way you work, the way your strategy is. Otherwise, at some point, you might be blacklisted from some or other of your stakeholders, and that could be a problem. So on the banking side, that's what we do. On the advisory, for example, on ESG, that could be simply ESG rating advisory. ESG rating in itself is a kind of black box that you need to accompany corporates with that. But it could be as well more broader advisory, explaining to them who their stakeholders are and what they expect from them, benchmark them against their peers, tell them what are their investors' pool expecting or what are their new shifts. So trying to give some light in this current environment that is a big transition for everybody. Some companies that are more advanced are even thinking that they might lose their license to operate if they don't change the way they work. So that could be really, that could be bad. So there is great pressure. Now, what I'm very pleased to see is that corporates are getting themselves into alliances. We saw, for example, that the Global Compact from the United Nations has created this task force of CFOs for the SDG. for me, that's very powerful, because when it comes to CFOs, that's where you have the power to engage budgets, to decide on where the money goes, the investments for the future years. That's very important. So I think it's going in the right direction. But what we are trying to do, even more than that, is to go down to the impact level. Because people could stay at, for example, the SDG, if you take that venue, and they are happy to claim, oh, what I did there and there is very much positive for SDG 6 or SDG 7, but we don't really have the measurement. So we need to go down to what matters really, and what matters for us is the impact. So when we work on a project, like many banks, we started years ago to look at the negative impacts through the Equator principles. But we go one step further, and we have adopted the positive impact framework with UNEP-FI that Anthony has mentioned before. So the principle is that you are going to look at the negative impacts on a project, and you need to make sure that they are properly mitigated. But also, you're going to pay attention to the positive impacts of a project, and to measure in terms of employment, in terms of financial inclusion. If you work on each project and you go down to the impacts, but it's very important for the company. It's important for us because we are proud and our employees have a lot of sense in this. But also we create financial products because investors want to participate to projects that do have positive impact. And I was pleased to see that the European taxonomy has adopted this notion of do not harm, because this is exactly that. We look at positive impacts on some of the pillars of the development, and we pay attention that we don't have negative impacts that are not going to be properly mitigated. So that's one part of what we are looking on projects. And UNEP-FI now has developed a tool that is very good for corporates. That's even more ambitious, because the idea is to see whether a corporate will generate positive impact with its diversity of activities. And so it's a kind of journey, of course. You're not positive or negative. You're somewhere on your transition, and you will have all the tools to measure on your various activities if you're contributing to positive impact in general, and how year after year you may invest or divest or change your habits, your supply chains, so that you're going to converge towards a positive impact company. So I think these are quite powerful tools to help corporates and to make sure we all speak the same language. Now, on the final point I would like to make is about the transition. So for me, there are, of course, the two types. The energy transition in itself is a huge journey, and the financial institutions are there to accompany their clients with the right sustainable banking tools. First, people need to understand that this is not a question of renewable energy only. The energy transition is impacting everywhere, everything. And it's a big amount of investment to be made on the usage of energy, on clean mobility, in the sustainable cities, on energy efficiency of your buildings. So that's the whole world that it's touched. So we launched a quite ambitious initiative in the bank to train everyone, so that people understand what is at stake, and then they can really advise their clients on their own transition journey. So it's an interesting time, because some people are afraid when in their portfolios, for example, they follow oil and gas companies. They might be afraid that tomorrow they will be out of job. In reality, they start to understand that it's the contrary. If you take an oil and gas company that has understood what's going on, that has published some ambitions, then they will probably divest from some oil and gas, and they will invest much more in everything that is linked to the energy transition. And there you can help them, because they will need partners. Maybe they will need infra funds. Maybe they will need structures for off-balance sheet financing. Maybe they will need partners to carry their investments for the energy transition, because they don't want to have them on their balance sheet. There will be associations, there will be partnerships. So I think it creates a bigger world of opportunities. So if you don't sit on your chair and be depressed that, oh my God, the world has changed, what am I going to do? But if you do understand all the possibilities under the transition, then that should create jobs, that should create opportunities. And for us bankers, that should create a lot of proximity with our clients that will need our help, if you want. That's on the energy transition. And previous speakers talked about the fact that we need to have the social angle under the transition, the just transition, as we say here. That's very important. The social angle will be determinant, because otherwise it doesn't fly. You saw what happened in France last year with our yellow jackets. You cannot impose on people a new paradigm where they are going to lose all their money. It has to be organized completely. So that's an exciting society project in itself. And we do work on that. But more than that, we pay quite a lot of attention and time on new business models that are based on impact to help our clients develop new markets. And that's more on the emerging world. Sometimes people say that there is a huge gap of financing of the SDGs, meaning there is not enough money to finance the SDGs. But that's not true. What happens is that we don't have enough projects that are bankable, but there is a lot of money to be invested. So what we're trying to do is develop new business models with our clients that are not traditional, that are going to be based a lot on digital and also on the monetization of impact. So you see, we are back to impact, because in the end, that's what counts. You don't need a university, you need education. You don't need a hospital, you need health. If you think this way, maybe you don't have RFPs in emerging countries for a mega hospital that nobody can afford. Maybe you're asking for health, and that could be done in remote areas everywhere, thanks to digitalization, and maybe a doctor that is based in the capital city. So what I would like to transmit as a message here is that if we think about impact, which is really what we want, then we can be a bit more creative, and maybe we can together develop new products and new ways of thinking that will allow us to bring the SDG a bit more to life, because frankly, we only have 10 years. And in the past 5 years, I don't know how much we have done really. Or maybe we have done what was the obvious in terms of social infrastructure and so on. And now it's going to be a bit harder, and we need to think a bit differently.
Thank you, Hasina, for this contribution. And a strong word that you, and it has a lot of meaning, is proximity, and it changes also the image you have from a bank and from an investor. I think also Anthony said it, but you emphasize it, the proximity of the teams with their customers, basically with the corporate, in order to look into negative and positive frameworks, making the transition agenda, the partnerships, etc. So I think that's a very important word you have used, and I would like to shift now to the corporate, and would like to go to Mrs. de Boer to see how a leading company like BASF in this field, what their journey was and how they are trying to further this concept. So, Mrs. de Boer, I hope it will go well now, but it looks like it. My team confirms it will go well. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can now finally hear me well. Good. I apologize deeply. We had some severe technical issues, so we had to reprogram the computer to get the mute button on. So I'm sorry for that. Now, let me explain a little bit how we see this whole transition as an industry. You have heard from my pre-speakers, there is a lot of movement in the financial environment out there. BASF itself is since many years engaged in GRI reporting standards since 2003. We are reporting on integrated reporting since 2007. Also, the ESG ratings, CDP, MSCI, and Sustainalytics is part of what we do from a regular point of view. But what I would like to give as a food for thought here is, all in all, year by year, we have more than 247 reports, indices, and actually, KPIs to fulfill from all kinds of angles. And my question to the community is, I think it's time for more collaboration, because I'm really a fan of competition on methodology, but not so much on competition on creating new standards, because it's actually same cost for everyone and you cannot compare it. So this is one thing I would like to give as food for thought to the community. I think it's urgently needed that we start to have a common language so that we can compare sector by sector how true value creation could look like. Now, when you look at the capital market today, and this we have seen 8 years ago when we started calculating what is the true value that a company like BASF, together with 70,000 suppliers and all our customers create, we calculated, monetarized not only the profit value of the value chain, but also the social impact, which was 70 billion euro of purchasing power created, plus the environmental impact, which was 30 billion. Now, today, the capital market does not know at the moment the true value that companies create, monetarized. And the question is, how can we steer and channel investments into so urgently needed innovations, for example, for a sustainable future? So what are we at the stock market optimizing if humans are not seen as a value factor? In fact, in our balance sheet, our human labor is represented as cost factor and not as a positive value contribution. Education is very difficult to portray in terms of macroeconomic impact, but also the nature has no true value. So the question is, what are we actually optimizing at stock markets? And this actually builds on what my pre-speakers have said. We need to think from a shareholder perspective towards a system value logic, really looking if the environment is the resources that we can access, it's a limiting factor. So what value do we dedicate to it that we as corporates use? And if society is the target for whom we are actually investing, innovating, so what is the power of society and the value we unleash? We have seen the connectivity between purchasing power and job insecurity very nicely during the COVID-19 crisis. Because if companies are insecure in their development, also salary get under pressure, and then there's a lot of state governmental power involved in terms of financing a transition towards a European recovery, for example. But the question is, how many of these viruses can we actually afford? And don't we need to think a little bit more on a systemic change of how to create value? So why is this so important? 8 years ago, BASF has started thinking about it more deeply. You have to know that the balance sheet that we use today was invented in 1500 by Luca Pacioli, an Italian monk and mathematician, friend of Leonardo da Vinci. And he was brilliant. He invented the T accounts. But ever since, there hasn't been much changes, even though we today have climate change and digitalization, which was, quite frankly, not really existing during 1500 to that extent. So I think it's time to think more systematically, and I think the pre-speakers have alluded to it, about a more systematic change to how we report and how we structure value creation for companies. And let me make one very important point, because several pre-speakers spoke about certain areas of industry that should not be included anymore and others that should. I have to say, our view on that is it's more inclusive. Why? Because the Paris Climate Protocol will not be achieved if only 20% of players who are already green do see a financing option in future. In fact, we believe that many actually areas of industrial production need to rethink their models. So what is of utmost importance is that we see a more inclusive way for change, and this means even at the beginning of the value chain, being very upstream, we have to rethink the way we contribute CO2 levels. Why do I say that? Because generally, at the beginning of the value chain, it's where most of the CO2 is created. And the more you go to the end of the value chain, the CO2 footprint, for example, becomes less. So if you just concentrate on 20% of the value chain, you achieve not much for the Paris Climate Protocol. So we need an incentivization system for the entire value chain to rethink the way how we emit CO2, just as one example. This was the founding belief. Weibull 2 years ago founded the Value Balancing Alliance. It's an alliance that goes beyond individual ideas of how to do KPIs. We found more than 1,000 companies worldwide that are working on reporting standards, ideas how to measure impact. And so in this alliance, there are banks as well as industrial companies from various sectors. It's a multinational alliance where we decided to bring all our methodology together to truly measure impact across industries. And the approach is truly inclusive, deliberately, because we feel everyone has to do and go through this transformation. So in this alliance, there are global institutions like universities from Europe, but also like Oxford, Harvard, Side Business School that help us from a scientific point of view to get the right impact measurement in place. This summer, we have finalized the first standardized impact tool, which currently a lot of companies are piloting and testing, because there are 3 criteria that are most important. These standards have to be simple, and they have to be scalable across industries, and they need to be leveraged over time. So this is very important to make them applicable, which is still a challenge in the current taxonomy because it's very complicated. So one core message I would like to give here is it's very easy to become super complicated in SDG criteria. The art of implementing this broadly and internationally will be to really start simple so that people can apply it and that it is implementable. So what we try to offer with this alliance is a network of companies that are willing to test the future in company steering and to really pilot these kind of impact measurements. Now, last but not least, I think what I would like to give you as a last food for thought from our side, I think the industry is ready to go to a new age of transformation. The Green Deal, we see with 50 to 100 new innovation markets across Europe. But what is missing is a dialogue between, industry, but also policymakers and civil society. Concrete roadmaps, how to really transform from one state to the other. We see probably a historic level of funding raised by the EU Commission, which we are very thankful for. It's more than 750 billion plus. And this is historic because it's a paradigm shift that is close to the Marshall Plan that we had once. And I think these future markets need to be funded very wisely because we need to bring this in alignment with the transformation time of industry and to do this as fast as possible. So from my side, industry is ready to go, but I think it's most important to do this pragmatic. It has to be implementable. And I think we need to collaborate much more than just adding new KPIs. So this is what I would like to contribute here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your contribution. That is indeed very rich, especially talking about inclusive transformation, but then also having these concrete roadmaps of transition that needs a collaboration also with civil society and policymakers. And I'm looking a little bit, I let my speakers speak a little bit more sometimes because it's so interesting. So I didn't intervene too much, but without further ado, I would like to go to some reaction exactly from civil society. And as a next speaker, we have Carina Koller. Carina, you are working for the WWF as Senior Finance and Utility Coordinator. Before you worked for UNEP and also for the European Commission DG Climate with the focus on international climate finance. And now you are also involved in the Europe Beyond Coal project. So you heard what the expectations are, what the direction is of the European Investment Bank, for example, and of the Commission, what companies are trying to do, what they are trying to do together in the different frameworks. How do you look at that, and what is how would you set the direction in this collaboration piece that Saori just outlined? Karina,
Well, thank you
the floor is
very
yours.
much. I do believe I have some slides, and could you also confirm how much I have time to use? So I'll try to be succinct.
The slides are getting there, and you would still have 10 minutes, but if you can do it in 7 or 8, it's even better.
Thank you very much. So I've been asked and tasked to comment on the 3 corporate examples that we just heard, and I will do so immediately after a few slides, because I feel that it's easier to pivot from the example of coal in specific, and then to kind of highlight some of the perhaps even critical feedback that I have. So first slide, please. So my daily job, what I do, is to look at the coal sector in Europe, and I feel that it's actually quite a good proxy for how all those high-level principles that we've heard already, how they actually land in the real world. How do they translate into actual transactions on the banking side as well as on the investor side? I'm not a chemicals expert, but I also have a few comments on BASF's carbon performance, and I'll go to that in a bit. But first of all, whenever there is a high level, maybe in a zero collateral target, it's very important to see what's actually in it. So on the coal side, why I like to use that as proxy for most of the high carbon sectors is that it's quite a black and white discussion, unlike many of the other high carbon areas. So what we know from the global coal exit, that has to be achieved in the next 10 years. That has been confirmed through quite a few studies, and there's a scientific consensus on it, including the most recent 2015 net zero scenario from the International Energy Agency. So essentially, the coal sector as a whole in the developed and the developing countries need to crash in the next 10 years. So all the financing decisions have to be mirrored through that prism. Next slide, please. And one of those, I think, difficult issues with dealing with high carbon sectors is that it takes a while before we understand how to skin the cat. And the analogy that we try to use is the size of the capital stock. So if we use the analogy of a path up, you have 2 tabs. One of them is a clean flow, and we heard quite a lot about that already from BBVA and Société Générale, that we really need bankable projects. We need the fresh capital to come in for renewable and clean areas as a whole. And at the same time, quite often, like say with the Equator principles, the dirty flow to projects needs to be capped. But what is less perhaps emphasized is at the same time, the size of the entire capital stock has to be trained. So the retirement and premature retirements, especially coal plants, but also others, say maybe combustion engines, or whatever will be on the sort of dirty side. So this means that whenever we are talking about the financial flows to companies, it cannot be just project finance. It has to be way more comprehensive than that. So usually corporate finance is the way to really cap the financial streams. Not just because we need to get rid of the existing fleet, but also because the corporate finance often is the finance that you use for projects on the company level. So how comprehensively are we actually looking at the exclusion policies of financial institutions? And I have the example of HSBC, sorry, we can stay in the slide, who has quite recently published a new policy on climate, which we would consider quite a low quality one. So there is a net zero targets, but nothing that has been actually baked into it. It only has commitments to the clean side, but really nothing, especially on coal, on the retirement side. And those are the details that really do matter at the end of the day. And now the next slide, please. These are all those financial institutions that have published a coal policy this year. As we can see, it's quite a number. So what we see these days in Europe is that there is nearly 1 new coal policy per week. As you see, quite big names there, and sometimes we even have 2 coal policies per year, as we've seen with BNP Paribas, for instance. But this does not mean that quantity replaces quality. So the details of the policies as they come out are quite crucial.
And this is not even at the high level yet, but what happens in the sectoral policies. Because my main tenet for today is that the sectoral policies need to be there in order to make the high level targets credible. So next slide, please. These are the main takeaways, and I'll use then the remaining of the time to perhaps zoom in on the individual companies. So whenever there's a climate and net zero target in itself, it actually doesn't guarantee real life impact. And the real life impact is the one that was quite well emphasized by some of the speakers already. Indeed, that is, the proxy for real life action. So in the short term, you do need to see real exclusions, especially in the coal sector. So there is really no shade of grey, unless the companies are willing to phase out coal within timeframes that are appropriate. They should not receive any form of finance, may that be loans, underwriting, investments, insurance coverage, nothing. So these sectoral approaches have to come into play, even if you are using science-based targets methodologies. And these have to be for the most crucial ones, not just coal, but also other fossil fuels and hopefully also deforestation. On engagement, that is indeed a very good vehicle for change, as long as the processes are time-bound. The targets have been set in advance, they are aligned with science, are assertive enough. And they should also happen in the public space. So one example from BASF, in fact, is that many of the investors have been engaging with the company for a while, particularly when it comes to the lobbying footprint, which we refer to the Scope 4 as Scope 4 emissions. So how do the lobbying activities actually erode European climate legislation? So this has been quite a big topic on BASF for the last year or two, and we've seen the first divestment decisions because of that as well in August. And once the divestment happens, it shouldn't be just kept within closed doors. It needs to be something that is brought to the open. Because for many companies, they may not even realize they've been divested from by the investors unless that decision has been made quite clear, accompanied by press releases and all the rest. So those are, I think, from the real life examples, how good financial institution action looks like. And just to double check, how much do I have time remaining for? No. Well, thank you very much. I hope that gave you enough detail.
I'm sorry, I was very rude, but I had just looked at the clock and my team is also looking relatively angry at me, so I need to. But thank you for that input, because I think I see a lot of, in a certain way, alignment between, especially on your last slide about the sectorial approaches, the engagement at time-bound with targets, etc., were elements that I picked up also from both, well, from the three speakers in our panel. I think the discussion is about, but that's why I think also Saori is making this appeal earlier on more dialogue and more collaboration also with policymakers and civil society, is about the pace, about the focus, etc. And that needs only more working together and more dialogue like the one we have now. I'm sorry, but we are so time-bound as well in a certain way. And I still have two speakers for which I would like your attention, because they are at least equally interesting as the previous speakers. And then the next one, I would like his reaction, if possible, is Professor Giovannini. And it's again a pleasure to have you with us, Professor Giovannini. You are not, as it mentioned here on the slide, not only the director of ASVIS and a former Minister of Labour, but for us at least, you are a leading thinker based on facts and data, which is not surprised because you are an economist and a statistician. You are an expert for the Commission, you are an expert for the OECD, the ILO. You have been working with us, and I think that's an element that that can be highlighted in this discussion as well. You have been working with us, and one of the driving forces in the work we have been starting to do on just transition, which also looked not only at the jobs element of the just transition, but also in the consumer and also in the financial system. You have heard the policy direction, you have heard the companies, how they translate that in very practical work, and you have heard also the civil society well, a civil society reaction on that one. So I would like to give the floor for your reflections, maybe also concluding reflections for this webinar. Professor Giovannini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this very, very interesting session. An Italian philosopher, Luciano Floridi, said that as the 20th century started late with the First World War, now this pandemic is making us enjoying, unfortunately, the beginning of the 21st century. So even these, also these century starting late. Is this just words, or do we really believe that we are witnessing a change of a century? I think that this fundamental question needs to be answered to understand the speed to which this change will happen. And just to reinforce this idea of possibly an historical moment, listening to what the speaker had said, the question is whether Europe will be the mother of a new evolution of capitalism towards sustainable capitalism. This question is not just philosophy, because when Mrs. de Bourg said that we have to change the accounting system, and I fully agree with her, in our ILO report on the future of the work, we raised exactly the same point, especially in the way in which people are counted and in our business accounting. We are talking about a deep reform of capitalism, because accounts just reflect our view of reading reality and also the role of companies. Do we really believe that this is a must? Yes, I personally believe in that, and I think that many other speakers, in a way or the other, underline the need for radical change. Otherwise, we will not meet the SDGs, and we will have a lot of greenwashing. Of course, things are changing, but not at the pace that is needed to take our world and our continent, which is the most sustainable continent in the world, but it's not sustainable anyway, really able to face the huge challenges that are just increased by the pandemic crisis. Here we have to face 3-4 key challenges that maybe could be addressed by CSR Europe, which is doing an incredible job, but we need many more reinforcing this point. First, according to all polls, there are resistances, of course, in the population. There is a group of people who are not convinced that this is the must, and they are males over 50 years, and normally they are those in power. In other words, what I'm just trying to say is that we need a big push towards these population of people, and we have to intensify the initiatives that we heard this morning in order to expose the maximum number of leaders to the new ideas and the new practices to show that it's feasible. Second, similarly, we need a European campaign towards citizens in order to be aware of the new opportunities, even saving opportunities, even investment opportunities, to tell them that the future is now, and they have the capacity to orient investments and choices, sales, and so on towards sustainability. But we still have too many people who heard about sustainability and don't understand that they have in their hands the power to change. Third point, there are huge resistances against this new approach. And Paolo Gentiloni, during the presentation of the ASVIS report, on Italy and Europe, said clearly that after the outbreak, coronavirus outbreak, there was a push towards the Commission to put aside all these ideas on sustainability. They resisted, they decided to go ahead, but we know there will be huge resistances also in the next few months. 4 points. Building back better? No, please. Transform forward our world. I know that this building back better is largely used also by UN and the Anglo-Saxon world. I prefer to talk about transformative resilience because new crises will come. And the latest report on strategic foresight and resilience show what member countries, but what in general governments and also private sector should do to look into the future and change. And final point, and I stop here, is about a big discussion that is taking place at the ECB, but not only in Italy, about the neutrality of monetary policy. There are strong push, and there was a meeting last week on this issue with Christine Lagarde and the others on the need for central banks to use ESG principles and parameters, even to decide when they have to buy private bonds. We know that there is a huge discussion on that. I think that we have to take a clear stance on this point, that the distortion, the bias that we are observing in the market, this is my view, is much higher and larger against sustainability of a possible bias if the monetary policy takes into account ESG. I stop here just to say that we need to invest a lot on cultural shift in practices, coherence of policies, and also shift in the way in which we look at the accounts, and therefore the way in which we look even at economic analysis, well-established models. Thank you very much.
Professor Giovannini, thank you very much for this contribution. And we have still a closing address from Pascal Canfin, but yesterday we heard he apologizes because he had a political commitment, but he taped quickly a video for us that we can show, but maybe I should conclude first. But it's worthwhile to listen to the video statement of Mr. Canfin. He's a strong supporter of the Green Deal and an advocate to link the recovery investment, which we heard earlier, to the green transition. He played also previously a major role in the high-level group on sustainable finance. So it's recommended that even after I concluded, you still stay like 3-4 minutes for his video contribution. But I would like to thank all the panelists. We could stay all day discussing this, is my impression, but we had to keep it short in the framework of a video conference. You can do maximum 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. But what I pick up as main messages, and I can also only give a kind of bullet points, starting with the one that Professor Giovannini started with. We need for a radical change, and we need it with speed. And that is, I think, a statement that we all can share, but we have to do, and we are speeding up is not always that easy. Commissioner Gentiloni started by saying we need to align the public-private, and we saw a good number of examples of that. It's about integration, and we have to look into and to measure better the impact of investments, and the true value creation was outlined by Saori de Boer as a methodology. The banks have explained to us and have shown us it's about setting clear targets, it's about accountability, it's about engaging your employees in doing that, in training them, and in the proximity with the customers and with the companies you invest in, but also inside the companies. It's a matter of proximity. Saori de Boer called that inclusive transformation. And last but not least, but it's a little bit a general thing, but still very important, civil society, company and policy engagement with each other and dialogue on the advancement of this agenda is very important. And I would like, those are some of the key words I picked up from today. You can continue also the conversation in the lobby of this platform that was created, or in one-to-one chats with the chat function that is on the right-hand side on your screens. And with that, I would like to close this session with then a video statement by MEP Canfin. And thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists, to all the speakers for the very rich content you provided today. And then I go to the video statement.
Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to be with you even remotely to discuss and have an insight about what is moving now on the green finance front in the European level. I must say that we are at a very historical moment. We approved during the summer the very first ever European recovery plan with European money and a European capacity to issue common debt. You know that it will be up to 650 billion, and it will be mainly done to have a green recovery. This 650 billion will be allocated for at least 37% for climate-friendly action. And for the rest of it, it will have to follow the do not harm principle, meaning that we are not going to invest in anything that will be harmful for climate and the environment and actually for future generations. So when you add all these rules we are negotiating, we are designing not only the very first European-wide recovery plan, but also the first plan aligned with the Paris Agreement on climate. Beyond this recovery aspect, which is of course of critical importance, we are also changing the rules of the game when it comes to green finance. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The first one is on green bonds. You know that this 37% for climate action will be financed by green bonds, more than 200 billion euros. That will put the European Commission in the leadership position when as an issuer of green bonds as soon as next year. So of course, everything we will do now on that front in terms of European legislation will have a direct global impact, because the first global issuer of green bonds will be the European Commission. Second is about the taxonomy. When you know that we adopted the taxonomy last November or December, and we are now implementing it, not only on financial markets, but also on the public finance side, when it comes to the EIB financing, when it comes to the recovery plan, as I just said, but also when it comes to the whole MFF. And that will be as well, to my view, a game changer. Another element is the ECB, European Central Bank, discussion about the new doctrine that will be that is under discussion and will be decided next year. If and I support Christine Lagarde in her attempt to move the doctrine of the ECB. If we go up to the end and we have by next year an ECB saying, okay, an asset in my purchase program is not neutral, and I have to take into account whether it's favorable to climate action or, on the contrary, very carbon intensive, and I will apply different rules, a sort of a climate filter to my purchase program and my selling program, that will have a very huge impact, because it will change the relative asset value on the market. I gave you only 3 examples, green bonds, taxonomy and ECB policies, but there are many, and we are at a very historical moment where the EU is really now seriously implementing the Green Deal and its climate action and its new climate plan. So happy to be part of that. of that adventure and much needed action, because we are now all aware of the climate emergency we are in. Thank you for your work, and I know that I count on you to support this action for climate. Thank you.